Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well, and I'm all the better for being able to share this special moment with you because I'm doing very well, thank you very much. And don't forget the rules, get that gorgeous drink, whatever it is that you enjoy drinking, and if it's something unusual, let me know about it. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, it was in the early fall of 1981, when all the dogwoods had turned a glorious bright red, the sugar maples a burnt orange, the hickories and poplars had turned a yellow gold, while the sourwoods and sweet gums had taken on a crimson blush. Truly, there are no words to describe the artist's palette of rich, profusive colours that had anointed the leaves in such a glorious, showy ensemble this season, which was far more opulent and grandiose than the resplendent robes worn by kings and queens from bygone generations, for indeed Mother Nature's rich jewels are without price. On such a magnificent, radiant day, I was fortunate enough to be riding down some of those extraordinary rugged back roads and horse-riding trails in the Kentucky countryside, on the back of my exquisitely beautiful American quarter house. I was totally mesmerised by the beguiling magnificence of the gorgeous scenic vistas, and it was particularly pleasant as the hot summer temperatures had dropped quite significantly, and so Snowdrop and I were having a very pleasurable ride. As I reached the right turning in the road, I didn't turn right again, which I normally would have done on my regular route home. Instead, I trotted forward, past our cattle gate, signposted the Lady's Manor, which was the name of our farm. The entrance gate sprawled out into a long sweeping driveway lined with mature oak trees that finally would lead to our farmhouse, but I wasn't going that way yet. On this occasion, even Snowdrop was confused, so I moved her in a small semicircle and used my feet and reins to nudge her to trot straight ahead, towards our neighbour's farm. I wanted to see if anyone had moved in yet, as the neglected, dilapidated farmhouse had stood abandoned and had been up for sale for rather a long time. I guess I wasn't surprised that it had not sold at once, even though the property itself was situated on an attractive prime piece of very desirable real estate. But it would seem the ramshackle farmhouse, along with the shabby barns and crumbling run-down stable blocks, were in a bad state of repair, and had been falling apart due to years of neglect, which had caused a significant amount of damage, rot and damp, and had possibly put off prospective buyers from purchasing the farmhouse, as everything would need to be fixed up and thoroughly restored to tip-top condition, and that invariably did not come cheap. I was amazed because I could hear banging sounds and observe workers wearing bright yellow helmets, plaid shirts and shabby jeans, carrying lumber over their shoulders, sawing timber beams and hammering nails into wood, and I realised that they were restoring the old bedraggled farmhouse to bring it back to its former glory. I now knew without a shadow of a doubt that we would have a brand new neighbour gracing our neck of the woods any time soon, for I could see a sold sign had been slammed into the ground and stood up proudly and erect by the side of the gate, while the for sale sign had been taken down and was lying in a builder's dumpster along with plaster, old bricks, cement, tiles and other debris. This was good news indeed, I thought secretly to myself. Truly, I hoped that the neighbour would have children my own age, as being 13 years old and an only child was not at all easy, especially when you didn't have anyone your own age to play with, and being homeschooled by my mother on the farm meant that friends were invariably in short supply, and a rather valuable commodity for the likes of someone like myself. I galloped back to our farm, more than a little eager to tell my parents what I'd observed, as I knew that they would be very pleased that someone had seen the incredible potential of that charming property that only required some TLC to bring it back to speed. My family lived in a symmetrical farmhouse that was oozing an abundance of character and charm, and had a Cape Cod-style look about it, only it wasn't that style because it was a double story. We also gained great pleasure and appreciation watching the indigenous wildlife scampering across the property in the early morning when the sun began to rise, or early evening when the sun set over the valley in a resplendent array of tangerines and golds. These wild animals would frequent our pond for a much-needed drink, and we would sit back on the wooden deck, armed with our binoculars and a drink, and watch the wildlife. On occasions we'd actually seen cougars, bears, and what I'm certain was some kind of a large black panther cat. It was at the end of the fall, when the temperatures had dropped quite considerably, and the trees had lost all their leaves, while much of our grassland had taken on that dull yellow tone, when finally the new neighbours moved next door, and my mother invited them over to lunch. Our next-door neighbour was a woman in her late 60s called Uma, along with her grandchild Luke. I noticed she dyed her hair bright blonde, and was meticulously turned out in a smart 3/4 length tartan black watch skirt, which she wore with a white top and a frilly collar, a dark green cardigan, and a very large cameo brooch, along with a very delicate string of pearls. I could see she seemed rather bashful and reticent, but I didn't get the impression she was naturally shy, self-effacing, or even timid by nature. On the contrary, underneath the mask she put forward, I sensed lay a very effusive, rather gregarious woman that was trying her level best to restrain herself from bursting forward with some interesting dialogue. The only way I can describe it to you is that she seemed deliberately to be pulling the reins in and muzzling herself as far as her conversation was concerned, and appeared rarely guarded and intentionally subservient. We were always given the brush-off if we began to ask her too many questions. "It's so very kind of you to invite us around for lunch," she said. "Only a pleasure," said my mother. "We're so glad that someone has finally decided to buy the old Glover place. I must say, it looks incredible. You've literally transformed that farmhouse, and so quickly too. I'm incredibly impressed." "Thank you," said Irma. "That means an awful lot. It has been a lot of hard work, but I must say it's been worth every penny. It is a gorgeous property and a great investment." "Oh, I agree," said my mother. "I commend you for seeing its potential. But are you going to manage that farm all on your own?" asked my mother, handing her the large bowl of salad to accompany her lasagna. "If you don't mind me saying, it's a lot of work for one person." Irma took the salad bowl from my mother and started to pile some salad on her plate. "I used to live on a farm in the Pacific Northwest, and granted, I'm not as young as I used to be, but there's still life in this old body yet, and I'm not adverse to a good bit of physical work. It's good for the soul, that's what my mother always used to say." "Oh, I don't doubt it," said my mother, flushing red with embarrassment. "I'm not saying you're not up to the job. It's just if you do need some jobs that require a man's touch, just ask my husband. I'm sure he'll be only too glad to help. Wouldn't you, Richard?" "Of course," said my father, interceding. "And it goes without saying that if you need any advice or jobs that require a little more brawn, just give me a call. I'll be only too delighted to help." "That's very kind of you," said Irma. "I'll bear that in mind." "I don't mean to pry," said my mother, "but where are Luke's parents?" Luke looked up from his food with an uncomfortable expression on his face and pinned his steely blue eyes directly on Uma. I watched with interest as Uma began wiping her mouth with her white table napkin very daintily and taking her time about it, almost as if she was debating as to what to tell us, and she looked up at my parents with frightened eyes, almost like a deer that had been caught in headlights. It was an accident. It was a car accident, and they both died, tragically died. I hope you don't mind, but I'd really rather not talk about it," she said, reaching quickly for her fork and ploughing into her food. "Oh, I'm so sorry," said my mother. "I didn't mean to intrude." She realised she was making our guests feel very uncomfortable, and Uma was not forthcoming about what was obviously a thorny, incommodious issue she didn't wish to discuss in any way. We sensed that when it came to asking any personal questions, she might as well have been wearing a sign which said, private on her dress, "Questioners will be prosecuted." So from thenceforth we never asked her any awkward questions. As far as we were concerned, Luke and his grandmother were very agreeable, sweet and endearing people. We determined that the tragic demise of Luke's parents had caused them both to clam up and become tight-lipped, secretive and clandestine. We certainly respected their privacy on such personal matters of the heart that clearly provoked and engendered feelings of great lamentation, mournfulness and grievous sorrow that was unambiguously clear to determine and comprehend in the circumstances. I think those two are suffering from post-traumatic shock disorder, my mother told us, once they'd left our home. Poor things! The very mention of their lost family members, and they seemed to become very unnerved. "It's very understandable," said my father. "The poor boy, losing his parents so tragically like that. It can't be easy. I can only imagine what he's gone through. Still, he does strike me as very mature for such a young age." "Well, tragedy does have a way of making people grow up," said my mother. "You have to learn the lesson of grief, and that's very tough." Before long, Luke and I became as thick as thieves and were pretty much inseparable, spending all our spare time together, as we were only a month apart in age. We would ride our mountain bicycles down some of those remote back-country roads, or our own horses down many of the rugged horse-riding trails, and we would go exploring the steep rocky inclines, looking for caves and other hiding places in the rocks, and of course we enjoyed playing hide-and-seek together in the wood green. One day as we were riding our bicycles, a mysterious, expensive black Lexus pulled over to the side of the road and indicated for us to stop cycling. Luke looked very skittish and on edge, and I could see his blue eyes seemed to become very round, fearful and rather dismayed. I stopped my bike as I thought that the driver was looking for directions, and maybe I could help. Normally I wouldn't have stopped for a stranger, based on my parents' warnings, but I thought those rules could be overridden on this occasion. I think I was disarmed by the polished, posh black Lexus, along with the air of importance that the stranger appeared to exude, for he would not have looked out of place dealing with world leaders or visiting important diplomats, for I noticed he carried himself with a proud deportment and decorum, and looked to be a man of high standing on very first impressions. As the ambiguous stranger climbed out of the car, it was clear to see that he was not from Kentucky. The man must be lost, I thought. He was definitely not from these parts, for no one dresses with this kind of sartorial elegance in this part of the world. The man towered at 6 foot tall, and wore his thick black hair swept backwards in a funky Elvis Presley-like hairstyle. I noticed he was wearing a swanky black pinstriped suit that fitted his lean body rather like a glove, and a stylish smart blue shirt with fancy gold cufflinks set with opulent diamonds, along with the shiniest black shoes that I've ever seen, that sparkled so much that you could see your own reflection in them. Yet there was something enigmatical and elliptical about this man that made my skin crawl, as his eyes were hidden by a dark pair of stylish designer glasses, and I got the distinct impression he didn't want us to see into his eyes, which did make me suddenly sense that he could not be trusted. I noticed his shaven complexion was rather uneven, and there was a very big, jagged pink scar that ran from under his cheek to the edge of his mouth that looked very bumpy like chicken skin, and was really very alarming, making me wonder if he'd been attacked by a knife at some stage in his life. Perhaps he wasn't such an upstanding gentleman after all. "Hello, kids," he said, giving us a broad, very dashing smile that seemed to lack genuine warmth and depth. "I wonder if you may know this little boy," he said, showing us a picture of a young boy with black hair. "I don't know any kids around here," I said, looking at the blurry photograph. "I'm 13 years old. I only know people around my own age, but this photograph is really bad, and even if I did know him, I cannot see him clearly enough in your picture to recognise him at all. I must say he does look rather young, and I haven't seen anyone like that at Sunday school." "It's a very bad picture," the man admitted. "Regretfully, it is like this, but it's all I have. I think he would be about your age now, so obviously he may have changed quite a lot. He would be about 9 when this was taken. I think he would be described as having dark hair and blue eyes." Well, a lot of people have dark hair and blue eyes, sir, I pointed out. It's not much to go on.
I understand, he said. I stopped you because word on the grapevine is that he moved to this area very recently, and I'm trying to get in touch with him.
Luke and I looked at the picture and both shook our heads. Sorry, sir. I wish we could be more help.
His name is Adam Riley, said the man. Does the name by any chance ring any bells for you?
No, sorry, sir, I said. I can't help you. I know of no one of that name, nor has anyone ever moved to the area lately. I had forgotten, of course, that Luke had only just moved to the neighbouring farm, but that didn't count because I felt like I'd known him for several lifetimes already. I turned to Luke. Do you know anyone that looks like that, Luke? I asked. Luke looked exceedingly awkward and shrugged his shoulders, and with an air of indifference he said, it's hard to see the photographs, sir. It's very blurry, but there are no boys called Adam living around here. Why are you looking for him, sir? Is he a friend of yours? The man brushed off Luke's direct questions.
Thanks, said the man, climbing back into the car
and whizzing away at an awful speed. Ooh, I didn't like him, did you? I said, shuddering. Something about him. Oh, it felt off. Not a nice man, Luke agreed. What's the matter with you? I asked, looking at Luke, who had grown as white as a sheet and was shaking like a leaf. You're not afraid of strangers, are you? I know we shouldn't have talked to him, but that man did look rather important. I thought he wanted directions. You could see he didn't live around here. He was rather like a fish out of water, so I kind of felt sorry for him, and I thought it would be rude if we ignored him. It's not that, said Luke. That man, well, he was looking for me. I'm Adam Riley. You are kidding, I said, my eyes growing like saucers and my jaw dropping to the ground. But I don't understand. Your name's Luke, and the boy in the picture has dark black raven hair. You're completely blonde. Luke is not my real name, he said, and my grandmother dyes my hair blonde for the purposes of my disguise. My real hair colour is very black, and I recognise that photograph. It wasn't taken when I was 9, it was taken when I was 8 years old. Even my grandmother dyes her hair white, and she's grey, for the very same reason. We're both in hiding. Who are you hiding from? I asked, looking astonished. A very, very bad, evil man. My father, he said. He'll stop at nothing to kidnap me and force me to go back and live with him, and that can never, ever happen. I would rather die than live with him. You're hiding from your own father, but I thought you said he died in a car crash. That was a lie. It is true that my mother is dead, he said. My father was the one who killed her. There was no car accident. We fabricated the story to protect our identities. That's what you do when you don't want people to find out who you really are. It isn't easy being undercover. You are kidding, I said. Why on earth would your father do such a despicable thing to your mother? And if he did, why is he not locked away in prison for her murder? Luke looked very solemn. Things are never as black and white as they seem, he said. That's what Grandma always says. You see, you do sometimes get police that are not on the right side of the law. You do get corrupt law enforcement that can be in with the mob in order to get a cut of the loot. It happens. I will tell you everything, he said, but you must make sure you don't tell another solitary soul what I'm about to tell you. I cross my heart, I assured him. I won't tell a soul. We both parked our bicycles against the hilly embankment on the side of the road and went to sit under a large shaded oak tree in a flowering meadow, while Luke began to tell me his incredible story. And in a strange, rather peculiar way, he seemed almost relieved to get it off his chest, as if the secret had been weighing down his heart heavily. I watched him as he twisted flower petals in his hands as a form of distraction, breaking them up into tiny pieces and throwing them onto the ground in a higgledy-piggledy fashion. My father's called Dennis. He's a gang leader, or a mobster if you like, of a drug cartel. The only way I can describe him to you is he's a murderous thug. My father has done some really bad stuff, and I mean bad stuff. I don't even know everything he's done, but I can only imagine
and imagining is enough." "You're scaring me," I said. "Like what? What has he done?" "Let me tell you the story from the beginning. But before I get into the gory, gruesome details that you probably won't want to hear, my mother Marlene actually met my father at a very young age, and he fell in love with her, and they got married. You know how grown-ups do. My grandmother never liked Dennis from the word go. She sensed there was something really off about him. She told me that from the first day she met him, he paced around the place like a peacock, strutting his stuff, as if to say, 'Look at me, I'm the best.' He had an air of superiority and spoke down to everybody. He dressed like a gangster and wore opulent gold chains around his neck, and flashy big watches and thick signet rings on his fingers, and always dressed in dapper, expensive Italian designer leather jackets and fancy leather loafers. My grandmother knew he was a nasty piece of work from the moment she met him, and she actually witnessed him kicking the neighbour's dog, who was just trying to be friendly to him, and lose his temper over the tiniest of things. Of course, like any protective, dutiful mother, she tried to warn my mother not to marry him. But in those days, my naive mother was headstrong and very beguiled by the tall, dark, handsome stranger that swept her off her feet, wined and dined her at some of New York's finest restaurants, and lavished on her expensive clothes and jewellery. I think in those days my mother found his charm impossible to resist, as he laid it on thick. "Was your mother pretty?" I asked. "Yes, but not in your standard conventional way, like you see in the magazines. I don't think my father was interested in that type of girl. My mother was more fresh, homespun, innocent, naive, not sophisticated, but pretty. Yes, pretty." "Sorry, go on with your story," I said. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "Well, after my mother had been married to my dad, she soon began to see all these really villainous, iniquitous ruffian types visiting the house at all hours of the night, and would tell my grandmother everything, as they were incredibly close, and she wasn't happy about these nighttime visitations. It was like something scandalous and untoward was going on. She said she knew that my father was up to something nefarious, and it was deeply troubling and disturbing for her, and caused her undue distress. My mother would hear Dennis talking for hours on end with the living room door locked, and sometimes she would hear him scream, "If you don't do as I say, I will kill you and your family. Do you understand?" And she would hear bangs on occasions, like a gun going off, or a terrified, discomposing, distressed scream that was so petrifying it sounded like someone was being seriously harmed inside that very room, almost like they were being terrorised. You could hear the cries of pain and agony, and it was brutal and would leave my mother in a state of panic, wondering if she should call the police or not. She would sometimes squirrel me away to my grandmother's cottage at the bottom of the yard, as she was so concerned about the unexplainable activity back at the house. When she started to ask my father what on earth was going on, he would beat her up so viciously and tell her to keep her mouth shut, or she would be very sorry. She ended up going to accident and emergency for various fractures, and my grandmother kept telling her to go to the police, but she simply refused point blank. I think she was terribly afraid of my father and was too scared to leave him, lest he should take me away from her, which he always threatened to do. He'd say, "I'll kill you, and I'll keep Adam." As I got older, my father became more and more involved in this insidious underground world, and we soon cottoned on to the fact that he was very much dealing with drugs, and I believe he was the gang leader because he called out all the shots, and everybody did his bidding on command. You could see people were absolutely petrified of my father, as he was a vicious, brutal man, without a shred of compassion. Yet towards me he exhibited a very gentle and kind demeanour, as I was the light of his life, and he lavished all his loving attention upon me, and would get me to sit on his lap while we watched television together. But I hated and despised him because of the way he beat my mother up. I couldn't forgive him for that. I knew my mother was desperately sad, because I would hear her sobbing at night in her bedroom, and my father would scream at her, calling her all kinds of obscene names, and telling her to shut up. One day when I came home from school, I noticed the door to the living room that my father permanently kept locked was now ajar, and I could hear my father was swimming outside in the pool, doing his 100 laps. I've never been in that room before, so I wanted to take a quick peek. I think he must have accidentally left the door open, so this was the perfect opportunity for me to snoop. I was inquisitive and curious by nature and still am, and so I tiptoed into the living room, if you could call it that. It was really a large, swanky, well-appointed room. The far end was a living area with coffee tables and leather settees that opened out into the patio and finally the swimming area. The front part of the room was like an office, cum bar if you like, with gleaming oak-polished desks and chairs and large, shining, ornate, intricately carved wooden cabinets that were all graced with hundreds and hundreds of crystal decanters filled with all kinds of alcohol, and there was also big boxes of thick Cuban cigars lying around. I saw this round thing wrapped up in a black plastic bag sitting on an opulent silver tray on the desktop, right next to a big silver ice decanter filled with ice. And whatever it was dripping red droplets of blood on the black and white marble floor. I pulled back the black bag cautiously to see what it was inside, and then I began to scream, as I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I could see a decapitated head of a thuggish man that I remember seeing once before visiting my father, but the last time I'd seen him, he was alive. Now he was dead. "You're kidding," I said. "You saw a human head in a black bag on a table in your father's office?" Luke nodded. On hearing my terrified screams, my mother bolted into the room, and seeing the decapitated head on the silver tray, she began to scream. She took me into her arms and then got me to hide behind the curtain because we could hear my father's wet footsteps running from the pool through the sliding doors back into the room. "What are you doing in my private office?" my father yelled at my mother. "Get out of here now! You know you're not allowed in here." "Where did this head come from?" my mother cried. "What have you done? Are you completely insane?" I could hear her sobbing. "I'm going to call the police," she said to my father. "You need locking up. You're seriously, seriously sick. No one normal can do this. You've murdered a human being. How can you even look at yourself in the mirror?" "He got what he deserved," said my father, holding my mother hostage against the wall, while pinning his hands around her neck. "That's what happens to men if they betray me," he barked to my mother. "If you don't keep your mouth shut either, your head will be next to his on this desk. Do you understand?" "I will go to the police," my mother piped. "I will tell them everything evil that you've done. You just can't get away with this." "Oh, and you'll speak to the big boss," laughed my dad, "who just so happens to be my business partner. He's making good dough out of me. Real good dough. I don't think your reporting me is going to get you very far. Ha ha! With any luck, you'll get committed to the nut house on my recommendation, and then you'll never see our son again." I was hiding behind the curtain, and tears were pouring down my cheeks, and my heart was thumping violently in my chest. I was hoping my mother would shut up before my father became more belligerent and out of control, but instead she kept challenging and threatening him to tell the authorities about his heinous, despicable crimes, and she just wouldn't shut up. All of a sudden, everything became deadly quiet in the room. So quiet that you could hear a pin drop. And then I heard a strange, choking sound. And that must be when he strangled my mother. Then I finally peered through the curtains, and my father was dragging my mother's deceased body across the carpet by her stockinged legs. I remember being so horrified that I was barely able to move a single muscle. I was frozen to the spot. "He killed your mother?" I gasped. I think my mother had just had enough of my father's duplicitous shenanigans. She was beginning to fight back, and that's why my dad killed her. "She was very brave," I said. "Brave and foolish," said Luke. "That's what Granny says." "What did you do next?" I asked. "You must have been terrified out of your life." "Well, once my father left the room, I ran to my grandmother's cottage, and she lived on the property at the bottom of the yard. She took one look at my face and knew exactly what had happened. I just said, "He killed her." We bolted to the car and drove to the airport. My mother had told my grandmother to run away with me if anything should happen to her, and she had given my mother all the money we could possibly need to start a brand new life. She had taken a great deal of my father's money behind his back. So now you know why Grandma and I are living alone on the farm. We're in hiding from my father, hoping and praying he'll never find us. So that's why the man was asking questions. He was clearly hired by your father to look for you. What are you going to do? Because he seems to have picked up on your trail. Granny and I have been very careful not to leave a paper trail to avoid being discovered. But I'm not going to tell her what happened because she'll want us to move again. And I'm so happy here, I don't fancy moving away. I love it here. And you have become like a sister to me. I don't want to lose our friendship. You won't say anything, will you? Of course not, I said. I also love you like a brother, and I don't want you to go either. If anyone asks, I'll pretend you're my birth brother, if that helps. A whole year went by, and Luke and I were quick to forget about the strange man in the black fancy Lexus, until one day it happened all over again, and the very same man tried to flag us down. But upon seeing him, we cycled away as fast as we possibly could. "Adam!" screamed the man. "Come back! I know it's you! I've come to take you to your father. He wants to see you. Come on now, be reasonable." Luke looked at me in alarm, and we dumped our bicycles on the side of the embankment and began to sprint as fast as we could into the heart of the wood green, with the man running after us, firing warning shots, which were clearly designed to intimidate us, as there was no possible way that this man would kill Luke, so we just kept running. It was fortunate that we knew the wood green so well that we could find the perfect quintessential place to hide, which was a little rock with a small enough gap behind it, by which the two of us could conceal our bodies without being seen or discovered. It was only by random chance that we had found this incredible hiding place a long time ago, and so we were confident we were pretty safe and were unlikely to be discovered. I was about 14 at the time, and being shot was the scariest thing that had ever happened in my life, so my heart was thundering violently in my chest, and my breathing was very heavy. I peered out cautiously from behind the rock, and could see the smart man in his pinstriped suit walking around the wood green with his gun in his hands that he kept reloading with cartridges and randomly firing. He started yelling out, "I'm going to stay here all night if I have to, Adam Riley. I'm going to smoke you out. Your father wants you to come home with me, and I won't leave these woods without you." Imagine the life you could lead with your father. Expensive cars, all the money you could ever want, expensive toys, fancy holidays. You could have it all, boy. Why would you want to live in a dump like this? For how long we hid behind the rock, I do not know, but it was very clear that the man was looking for us. All of a sudden we could hear what I can only describe as distant chattering, and I realised that people were walking towards us, and I could see the smart man looking rather apprehensive, almost as if he didn't know what course of action he should take, so he quickly took cover behind a tree to hide from the walkers. All of a sudden the two chattering people came into focus, but they were not human at all. Well, not exactly. These incongruous humanoid creatures must have been about 7 foot tall and 3 feet wide across the shoulder area, and possibly 500 pounds or even more. They were covered in long, flowing, dark, glistening brown hair, and they both had pert breasts, so they must have been female. It was ironic because they were so involved in a garrulous conversation and were talking excitedly backwards and forwards in a very fast language as they walked, with their stooped backs and swinging overlong arms that hung below their knees. Luke and I were absolutely astonished. Neither of us had ever seen creatures like this before. They were so human, but they had ape-like influences to their appearance, which was clearly apparent, especially in the pyramid shape of the head that folded seamlessly into the shoulders. We were too far to see the details of the creature's face that appeared to be rather obscure. All of a sudden the creature appeared to smell something because she stopped dead in her tracks, with her nose in the air, and began to sniff. I watched in astonishment as she quickly nudged her friend and pointed towards the tree where the tall stranger was hiding. The man who was hiding behind the tree, on realizing he'd been spotted, pounced out of the tree line and began firing at the creatures at random, while they kept jumping out of the way of his bullets, so that the man began to miss every time. I think he must have realized that his gun was no match for these creatures, which were so imposing and impressive in size. I could see he was trembling so much. He was shaking violently and was terribly, terribly afraid. I'm not sure what happened, but the man kept reloading his gun as fast as he possibly could. He was so frantic that he was just firing all over the place with no sense of control or coordination. I think his palms were probably sweating profusely, and the gun he was holding was possibly slipping precariously in his hands, disabling his firm grip. I watched in horror as he fired another round, and then one of his bullets ricocheted, bouncing backwards, hitting him directly in the chest, and he fell backwards, dying on impact, killed by his own bullet. It was the most bizarre, incongruous and outlandish scene that I've ever witnessed before in my life. Being killed by your own bullet, I mean. The two female creatures did not show any aggression, which was in itself extraordinary, but perhaps it was because everything unfolded so fast, and they were too stunned to even react. I watched them gliding over to the man, and was astonished to see that he had effectively killed himself, and they stood there talking over the dead body, discussing it in detail, as they found what had happened to be of great fascination, and I think they were trying to make sense of it. They looked like two nattering women at a tea party, talking non-stop. They got incredibly excited when they saw the man's diamond cufflinks, and each creature took off a cufflink to keep for themselves, and they were thrilled about it. They kept examining the piece of jewellery over and over again, in total awe. Finally, the creatures just glided away, but they never stopped talking, not even once. We could still hear their excited voices from far away. Of course, all these years later, I now know that the mysterious creatures we encountered were Bigfoots. Luke and I cycled back home hurriedly, and he begged me not to tell anyone what had transpired, and how he'd so nearly been kidnapped by a villainous man who was connected to his father in some way, and had obviously been paid handsomely to find him. Luke was so tired of living in hiding, and the last thing he wanted was to move away and to live a life forever on the run. So to cut a long story short, the body of the strange man was soon recovered and identified by the police as a man that they'd had their eye on for a long time and was heavily involved with a drug cartel. Once one domino fell, then everything else followed in sequence, and finally the whole drug cartel staggered to its knees as people were arrested and incarcerated, with the exception of Luke's father, who had managed to escape the wrath of the law. It was only a month later when Luke came running to my farmhouse, and he had a thrilled expression on his face. "What's up?" I asked. "Why do you look so pleased?" "Did you look at the paper this morning?" he asked me. "Of course not," I said. "I never read the papers. They're so boring." "I'm free," said Luke. "I never have to hide ever again. I can live in Kentucky forever and ever," he said, dancing around in joyous circles like an excitable dog. "Has your father been arrested?" I asked, looking amazed. "Have they finally found him?" "No, someone shot him dead on Monday night. His body's been recovered." "You shouldn't look so pleased about that," I said. "I mean, he's still your father." "Are you kidding?" said Luke. "My father is evil. I'm glad he's gone. He's not my father. Maybe by blood, but not in here," he said, pointing to my heart. "And it's in here that counts." "You're right," I said. "Boy, I'm happy for you. You finally are free." "What are you two looking so pleased about?" asked my mother, watching us with an amused expression on her face. "You look like you've won the lottery, Luke." "Oh, believe me, Miss Fleming, I've won the lottery, in a manner of speaking. And by the way, my name isn't Luke, it's Adam Riley." My mother smiled. "Adam Riley? I like that name very much," she said. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what a fabulous story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.